Jesus in My Life, Episode 9.
But I really felt like I was supposed to be a mom. So I just felt really rejected. I felt like my body was broken, like it was failing me, like I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. And why would I want something so bad if God wasn't going to help provide that? And that's a really lonely, dark place to be.
Welcome to Jesus in My Life, a podcast with Rob and Jack, where we interview everyday people like me and you about their extraordinary experiences with our Savior, Jesus Christ. Quick disclaimer before this episode begins. In order to protect the identity of our interviewer's child, we have chosen to censor out their name. Enjoy the show.
Well, we're so glad that you're with us today. And I'm excited because we have Lindsay with us in studio.
Welcome.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And Lindsay, this has been something since Jack and I started this Jesus in My Life podcast, been thinking, can't wait to get Lindsay here and sharing her story and Jesus in your life. And I actually have had the privilege of knowing Lindsay for 15 to 16 years. We were kind of like doing the math, and it seems that, man, that's quite a long time. And
It's been a minute.
Wow, so grateful for that. And then got to know Lindsay through my wife, and it was actually specifically through Toastmasters. And then just kind of hit it off right away. And then, of course, I got to officiate you and Jason's wedding. And so it's like lots of history here. And so here it's like come to this moment here for us to get to know you and then share specifically what God has done in your life. So I'm so glad that you're here in studio with us.
Yeah, I am as well. And it's really good to meet you today. We're going to concentrate on a very specific moment of your life and how Jesus met you there. But I think it'd be really good for our audience to hear a little bit about you. Can you give us like a short story of Lindsay and Jesus? Like, what's your story there?
Well, I'll start with I love dogs, people, and food.
Okay.
Perfect.
And my life sort of orients around those three things, ideally all of them together. I kind of traversed through lots of different churches in my upbringing. God was always present in my life and in my family. My dad was agnostic. My mom was a believer. So my dad always gave me the freedom to go and experiment and try and learn and go to any church. So I tried a lot of churches through friends, had a home church through my mom, and then just kind of never really found a home per se until Rob became my organic pastor, we like to say, and have just peripherally kind of continued to foster my relationship with God privately, I would say, and then peripherally through Living Water Church.
When you have a dynamic at home where one parent is really on fire for God and the other one is not really have God in the equation, it makes it kind of difficult. That was my story. My mom was an on fire Christian. My dad didn't not believe in God, but he had his life didn't revolve around wanting to know him or have much of faith or religion or anything like that. And I found when I was young that I would use my dad as an excuse to not follow Jesus. Was that at all a difficult thing for you? Did it influence you?
I think for me, it was always so clear how God, like my dad, lived. He is such an amazing person. He lives right. He does so many good things. And he's been so supportive of me and my mom and our faith journey that it never felt separate. Okay. But I did always kind of wonder, like, well, why, what is that about? And I've asked him questions over the years, and I've seen his relationship and acknowledgement of God transform, especially after, losing his own parents and just years, I think, and experience. And he read a book about evolution that really changed his mind because science now backs that evolution is pretty implausible. He's very analytical. So I wouldn't say it was a hindrance. It was a curiosity. But my dad's always been so supportive of me, as has my mom. So
that's great.
Yeah.
That's not the common story you hear. Usually it's at odds, right?
Right.
And so he probably was a true agnostic, right? I don't know, and I'm open to knowing the truth. And that's great. That's where our hearts should be postured.
That's right.
Yeah.
Lindsay, so if we can move into your story and how Jesus specifically met you. So why don't you go ahead and share with our audience kind of some of the lead up to that, some of those challenges. You and Jason got married, and then of course you wanted to be a mom. And so share some of that story, and then again, of course, some of those challenges that went with that.
I don't think the Lord puts things in your heart that aren't meant for you. So beginning with that, I kind of always knew I wanted to be a mom. And Jason, when I met him, it was not his plan to be a dad. And that evolved over time. I did have to kind of fight to have God in our marriage ceremony, as you probably remember.
Yes.
And Jason's a true agnostic as well. So it's kind of interesting that my relationship really mirrors my parents' relationship. But as we started trying to grow our family, and I realized like that looks different for everybody. And I wasn't personally super married to the idea of being pregnant myself, but I knew I wanted to be a mom. It's just so expensive to have children any other way. But it wasn't looking good. It was hard, and I'm very type A. And I just kept trying to sort of put my arms and really my hands around the neck of fertility. And the harder that we've tried, the more I researched, the more I tried to control that. The further I felt, not just from becoming a mom, but also sort of from the Lord, which is hard. And I'm still working through some of the guilt and shame around that. But I really thought it should just be easy, and I didn't understand why it wasn't. And watching my friends, start their families, and I give so much to the students that I work with, and I love animals and dogs. And I just kept telling myself, like, I'm a good person. Jason's a good person. We deserve this. Why is this so hard? Not really considering the miracle that the body, the human body leaves off and Jesus picks up. God picks up the rest of that. And I didn't really consider that in the throes of infertility.
Wow.
So we tried for a really long time. We got a dog, we went on with life, and I ended up having about 2 years of sustained infertility, starting testing and then getting pregnant finally, and then losing 3 babies consecutively. And I remember calling you and just saying, like, I'm surrendering sort of to this process. Like, this is really not in my control anymore, and feeling frustrated with God, but also realizing my dependency on him in this situation, because it wasn't working for me to control it anymore. And I remember you coming over and praying with me, and really just providing straight up counseling, because I was on the edge of like, I cannot handle how hard this has been. And then we got pregnant, and stuck. He's stuck. My son he was a miracle baby, but I had already shifted in my head and given it over back to the Lord and said, if this is supposed to be, then let it be. And if it's not, I surrender. I'll be an awesome educator. I'll be an awesome dog mom. I'll be the aunt of all aunts. And that's okay. Like, I can find my value and purpose in a different way than I always envisioned if that's not for me. So really, it was really me getting off my high horse and getting back to trusting the Lord's plan for me and believing that his plan is probably better than mine.
Yeah. Lindsay, I love that. And I remember the challenges after that third miscarriage. And boy, you were in a dark place. I mean, it was a real challenging time for you individually. And then of course, you and Jason, your marriage. And looking back, I just remember some of those conversations that we had. And you mentioned how God fit into that season, of course, specifically how then you did get pregnant, and then there's the miracle baby of what, if you can kind of go back to that time frame, and what were some of the things that you were wrestling with in terms of your relationship with God at that time?
I would be curious if other women would agree, but I think when you always sort of think you're going to be a mom and you feel like your life and your body is supposed to gear you towards that, and then it fails, air quotes fails, then who am I? What is the purpose? What is this all for? And I hadn't given a ton of thought I mean, all along in my career and in relationships, I kind of saw God working through me, and I kind of saw my purpose in different little glimmers, but I really felt like I was supposed to be a mom. So I just felt really rejected. I felt like my body was broken, like it was failing me, like I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. And why would I want something so bad if God wasn't going to help provide that? And that's a really lonely, dark place to be. And really, and I had secondary infertility too before we had my daughter, but really kind of pointing my finger at him, wagging my finger at him, admonishing that I'm not getting my way. I see this petulant child, like, what, why, you know, kind of throwing my hands up, being mad when I could have probably trusted. But I think that's a lot of other messages coming in and confusing a really simple, loving relationship with God. Instead of being quiet and praying and having faith, I tried to continue to control it and monitor it. And it was a really not pleasant place for me. My health suffered, my mental health really suffered. So it was hard. It was really hard.
I think, there's going to be a lot of people who listen to this and can relate. I mean, the struggle you went through is not one that you've been isolated in, right? There's been plenty of women who want to be mothers who have been able to. And that's a really difficult thing to walk through. And it's different for everybody. It could be a husband who can't get a job, right? He just, everything he's doing, he can't pick up, and your identity is wrapped up in being a provider and, help supporting your family, and not being able to do that is really difficult. And we, it's interesting, before we started recording, we were talking about the importance of identity and knowing who you are.
Yeah.
And so often we can wrap up our identities in what we do or what we produce, instead of who we're created in the image of. And did that understanding that you were created in the image of God, did that help later on in rectifying, like, why did God allow me to struggle through infertility? Did that help? Because you mentioned that you kind of like surrendered that to God. Did identity play a role in that?
Yeah, I think recognizing that I still had value without children. I think that's something that a lot of women really toggle between, like, who am I at a birthday party with 400 kids and moms if I don't have that?
Right.
So that season was really difficult. And realizing, like, I can still love kids. I can still impart lots of joy and love into a child's life. It doesn't have to be my own. And that was part of that surrendering and reacclimating my identity through, like, this. If I really want to be a mom or mother or love, I'm already doing that. God is already providing those opportunities for me. So how can I be so ungrateful in this season when I'm already being gifted this opportunity? So kind of reframing that. And then to segue into the secondary infertility that I had with my daughter, I really, really broke wide open after my 5th miscarriage. I had 6 total. And that 5th miscarriage, I think, was probably the closest to not wanting to be alive that I have ever felt. And as a suicide prevention educator, I hadn't had direct experience with that until that moment. And then I went, whoa, this is scary. Yeah. Whoa, this is dark. I need something way bigger than me to pull me out of this. And I think Jason and I both had that moment of really wide open recognition of, like, this is so hard that there's no coming back from this without God. And there's some darkness, some heaviness between us and our relationship that happened in that catastrophic time that I think there was nothing but up from there. And that's where I love to say the story that I love communicating. I love people. And I hear people talk about God or messages from God. Well, why won't God talk to me? And then finally God talked to me and he said one word, which I just think is like the best thing. It's such a great sense of humor that the Lord has. But I got to this really deep, prayerful, almost meditative, prayerful, these moments with God. Whenever I could be alone, I would just pray, like almost on loop. And I was alone in the house and I was praying over and over again for who I wanted the next child to be, which, by the way, thank you, Lord, because she is exactly who I asked for to a T. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. It's pretty incredible. And after probably 20 minutes of this really transient sort of meditative prayer with God, he finally said, yes. And I sat up in bed, and there's not even a dog in the room. I love animals. There's not a goldfish. There's nobody. And I'm like, what was that? And I got goosebumps, and I said, okay, I hear you. I heard you. And this was between 5 and 6 miscarriages. So I sort of in my gut knew that my second baby was coming because I had seen the miracle of my first child. And I believed in his power to make things, to fulfill the wishes of your heart, the desires of your heart. But I still think it's so funny that my identity was so wrapped up at that point in being mom, waiting for the second child, maybe not. And I got to that same place of like, well, if this is supposed to be, then fine. Like, again, that surrendering moment after really kind of already knowing, because he'd already told me with one word.
Yeah, right.
Isn't that his humor though? Yes. He kind of finds who you are and works his miracles the way you need it.
Absolutely.
So I got a yes.
You got a loud yes. Wow. That's so cool.
You know, and it's funny, God's answers are sometimes not immediate, right?
That's
like
right.
You see that in the story of Abraham. God tells Abraham that he's going to have a son. And God's sense of humor, he waits till Abraham and Sarah are old people.
Right.
To kind of make sure that they knew that when it happened, it wasn't them, it was him.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right. And I can't help but believe that's how kind of God was working in your life as well. Yeah. You can relate to Abraham.
You can totally
call
relate.
me Abe.
And now in the studio today is Abe. Wow. Well, Lindsay, why don't you share for us kind of Jason's process? I mean, I not to speak for him. Of course, maybe someday we'll be able to interview him. But, you know, you had mentioned that, you know, this was challenging in your marriage. And all marriages, of course, go up through ups and downs. But this was, of course, knowing you and Jason and being right there literally at your doorstep of the seasons of a lot of struggle and all of this. Tell the audience what, you know, where was Jason in this process, and what were some of the things that he was going through, kind of maybe similar in some ways?
Whew. His testimony it's different. he's come a long way, baby. I think it's really hard. It has been really hard for him, and I won't speak for all husbands of infertility, but how does he show up? Especially sort of agnostic at that point. How does he show up for me when I was holding a living being in my body and then it died inside of me? And then I had to expel that life that we really wanted. Like, how do you support someone who's going through that? And it does feel pretty isolating and alone. I mean, it's a lonely process to go through that. And it's his child too, of course. But I think he did the best he could. And I think in hindsight, if we were to go through what we went through now, I think there would be more prayer. I think there would be more, you know, joined leaning into the Lord than there was. But again, just like my dad, my husband's an amazing person. He's got so much heart and he's such a good person. I see the Lord in him. Obviously, or I wouldn't have made my life with someone like otherwise. But I think it was really hard, in short. I think it was really, really difficult for him to know how to show up for me, for him to trust that something good was coming. And I don't know that even still he would necessarily attribute our 2 children to God, but I know we both share that they are miracles, which of course is God.
Yes.
So I don't even know that he's really put words to that. I've spent so much time trying to make myself available to people who've had infertility and like share where it's helpful. I don't like to trauma bond, but I don't know that he's fully processed it. I think he's such a present person with our kids, and I think it's really hard to have little kids. So sometimes those blessings, I mean, we're still growing. We're still growing up right before their eyes, and they don't know it.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I appreciate how much he tried to support and respect me in his own ability, and how much grace he's given me for the huge, huge struggles that I've faced, and the real ugliness that I have sometimes unleashed on him because he was a safe person.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you answered my question.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Maybe this is jumping ahead too far, but Lindsay, there are other people who are going through what you've experienced right now. They're listening right now, and they are experiencing that darkness of the soul of infertility.
Yeah.
They've been trying for years. They've lost some babies. What words of help do you have for them in this darkness?
I definitely want to start with, if you want to be a parent, there are lots of ways to be a parent. And I think the Lord can help make those connections for you. For me, again, I want to say being pregnant wasn't the important part for me. I didn't have this desire to be pregnant. So I don't want to undermine a woman who feels really strongly in her heart that she wants to be pregnant, and that's her path. But for me, being a mom was more important than being pregnant. I just so happened to not be able to afford IVF in that season through all the testing and all the lab work and all the procedures and surgeries and all of that. Nothing ever amounted to it. So I guess I really relate to a woman's struggle who doesn't know why and doesn't know how. But I also literally am a living testimony of when you can trust God, he will move mountains for you. Yes. I still don't know why I was able to have these 2 babies and why I lost 6. And I think all the time about that moment when I get to meet Jesus and my babies. I mean, I think about that a lot. So if you've gone through infertility, that's one piece. If you've lost babies, the hope that you get to see them someday is literally what kept me alive.
Amen.
Amen.
But if you also can readjust your identity, like we talked about, and see the way that God's already moving in your life to be a mother, to be motherly, it's sort of, I keep throwing up my hands, but it's that sort of submission to, I can be what you want me to be now. I don't have to have my own baby in my belly to be a mom. Or really whatever your desire is. There's probably already things moving in your life, and you can have them now. I mean, loving my dog, my oldest dog, she was my baby. She was my baby. She was a spoiled brat. So I was already a mom. I was already a mom to students that I served. I was already a great auntie. So I think being present in what God has for you now, and he's asking you to do now, without losing faith, without ceasing in your prayer. I think, man, if I could have done that a little differently, I would, knowing what I know now. And I'm still working. I still apologize a lot. I still repent to the Lord for being so petulant, because he's been so good to me.
Yes.
He's been so good to me, way more than I deserve.
Wow.
I love that. And I think what I've grown to realize in my faith is God's a big boy and he can handle us.
Yeah.
He wants truth from our heart. Right? He knows what we're thinking anyway. So why are we, when we just talk to him in prayer, why are we trying to, use magic words or, be, proper in our etiquette? Like, you see the Psalms, the psalmists are raw in their emotion and expression of the darkness they're facing or the hopelessness they're facing. So I love that God's big enough to handle our little whiny, and we're kids. Yeah. We're kids, and he knows that.
Absolutely.
And, we have kids, you have kids now, like they can be, their communication to us can be pretty spoiled at times, right? Or naggy. And as we as parents we work through that. We love them. We love them, and they have a safe space among us,
Yeah, I think just one more tidbit on the whole journey. I think when I finally held in my arms for the first time and I felt that immense love, I finally realized this is what a glimmer of what you feel for me.
Yeah. Wow.
What you feel for all of us. I loved my dog. I loved my mom. I loved my husband, but it was such a different kind of love to hold that child. And, that's a whole nother thing. We almost died in labor. I had really rough pregnancies. Like the Lord made me work till the final hour of getting those humans here. But that moment of holy cow, that's what you feel. Like, that's a little bit of how you feel for me.
Yeah.
It's next level.
Absolutely.
Next level.
Wow. Just all consuming his love. Wow. Excellent.
One more question on the
Yeah.
flip side of what I previously asked. What words of encouragement would you have for husbands who have wives that are dealing with infertility? How can they support their wife? How can they endure through some of the darkness?
Man, I'm so glad you asked that. I remember literally having a pleading, tearful conversation with my husband. Like, there is no timeline to my healing. Please don't tell me you're good, so I should be good. I think he loved me so much that it hurt him to see me hurting.
Yeah.
And we were in it together. So of course, the next person who gets the grief as strongly as I do is the one who lost his own baby too. But it didn't happen to his body.
Yeah.
He didn't have a dead being in his body that he had to also grow and work so hard for. So I think just being really patient, really loving, and maybe reorienting your wife back to that bigger picture, the leaning into the Lord, pray with them, bring them a lot of chocolate and just be patient. And, I remember making this list of like, now that I'm not pregnant, here's all the things I can do. Sushi, hot bath, wine, like all these things that I was like, okay, fine. Then I'm not going to be pregnant. I'm going to do all these other things. Right. And really asking him to join me in my petulance and be there for me in all the seasons. So, you make a vow when you get married, and gosh, I did not fully understand what that meant. Now, 13 years later, I get it. And we're still kind of rowing through mud, but just being there and making sure your partner knows that you're there, even when you're the ugliest, because it's been ugly. Mm-hmm. I believe that he loves me and he's not going to leave. And now that he has found the Lord as well, it's kind of a renewed part of our relationship.
Yes.
Awesome.
So it's been kind of beautiful. And I think all of that led him to the Lord.
Yes.
But it would have been kind of different to go through this now, 13 years later, and having the relationship we have and survived what we survived and having the Lord in both of our lives. So, but yeah, basically, long story short, because I'm a talker, be patient, show up, be right there in the trenches, no matter what the trenches look like.
Wow. Lindsay, I'm so thankful that we got to interview you today. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and look forward to hearing how your story, your testimony will encourage those who listen to this podcast. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. And just so you know, our foundation for this is based out of Luke 8:39, where Jesus has delivered a man who was demon possessed. And this man wants to follow Jesus physically, but Jesus says to him, no, go back to your family and tell them everything God has done for you. And so he went all through the town proclaiming the great things Jesus had done for him. So he didn't just go to his family. He went to everybody in his path and said, Jesus has worked in my life. And I want to thank you because you did that today. You shared how Jesus worked in your life through the darkness and into the light of life, right? And thank you for sharing that. I know it's going to touch people's hearts. And we don't know the impact that this moment of sharing can have in many other people's lives.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. So thank you for being with us, and we'll catch you guys all next time. And now a reflection on today's interview. As a man, I don't think I could ever truly understand how difficult infertility could be for a woman. But what I do know is that God has great love for the women that are experiencing this or have experienced it. We see multiple stories in the Bible of God addressing the issue of infertility, recognizing it, and having mercy. Lindsay was able to eventually have children. But the truth is that not every single woman will. For those that are experiencing this now, I want you to know that God has grace for your situation, and you're not in it alone. In the show notes, we have provided links to resources for women looking for support in the middle of infertility. I highly encourage you to check them out. And please, dear sisters, Remember that you are not alone in this. So don't go through it alone. There are other women that can be there by your side who have experienced the same thing. And even if you feel alone, God is with you. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. And He has grace for your situation. Trust in Him, I beg you. Have a blessed week.
Thank you for listening to Jesus in My Life. New episodes release every Tuesday. Subscribe on your preferred podcasting platform so you don't miss a single episode. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing this podcast with a friend or family member. If you would like to help our visibility online, consider rating us and posting a review on Apple Podcast. Have an awesome Jesus in My Life story? Contact us at jesusinmylifepodcast@gmail.com.